you're sitting in the white folding chairs and Indians away, they are folding chairs. Please don't stand or kneel on those chairs, because if you do, they might fold. And if they fold, you're going to fall on the floor, and the floor is made of steel, and it's going to hurt. And that is not a good thing for a Saturday. Same rule applies to the bench seats on either side of the vessel. No standing or kneeling on those bench seats, but for a different reason. They are near the railings. The railings are next to the river. That's a real river. This is an actual boat. So if you are standing or kneeling on those benches, you have to stop suddenly or turn quickly. And it's a holiday weekend, which means we have people who have enough money to buy big boats, but not enough money to take lessons on how to operate them. So there's a possibility I could actually stop quickly.
There we go.
You can lose your balance, fall overboard. And that's where some falls in the seats. 20 feet down in some water that's pretty cold and not as clean as you'd hope. So please make sure you're safe at all times. On that one. Now, for a cruise the size, as you can see, the boat's pretty busy. We ask everyone, if you are on your phone, if you're trying to be a viral TikToker, you're on a FaceTime call, you're having a conversation about the importance of a hot dog and whether it's a sandwich or not, we understand all of these things. But please take all those conversations downstairs so that William, you're dosing that fellow right over there, can share his knowledge about the city of Chicago, its architecture and history. We want everybody to be nice. You all bought tickets, so if you want to listen to William, he'll be chatting away. If you don't, we understand that. If it's just a boat ride, or you need to straighten your legs, or you're just in a conversation. If you go downstairs, we do appreciate that. There's a full bar down there. Jamie's down there. He'll be happy to get you a cocktail, beer, wine, all sorts of good stuff. There's coffee and hot chocolate, pretzels and chips. It is credit card only, credit card. And the restrooms are downstairs as well. They're on the starboard side of the boat. The steps are in the back. Once we get going, if you do need something, if you have a question, just ask our crew. They're wearing orange, can't miss them. And we'll get going just as soon as we make sure everybody's on the boat. That should be in the next couple of minutes. Thanks very much.
Is this your student, Larry? Yeah, I saw that he's posting stuff on so okay, got it. Now I know who you're talking about.
Just to reiterate what we just had to say, please do use caution if you're ever up and moving about. It's going to be a pretty slow and smooth ride, which might even some of you might forget that you're on a moving boat. That's what I would advise against, because it doesn't matter how many times you hit the gym a week, how good your reflexes are, if you forget you're on a moving boat and misstep. Ask anybody who works here, falling on a steel deck will ruin your week. So it's just much easier to never forget you're on a moving boat, maybe some humility and some caution. Also, just to reiterate, please let us know if you need anything throughout the tour. It's a beautiful day for a boat ride, which means lots of people came out to take a trip, but it does mean we need to be extra respectful of those around us. So, take care of yourself in the sun, get some shade, let one of our crew members know if you need anything, even if you need us to have a quick conversation with you as a neighbor. We've been doing this for almost 100 years. There's nothing we haven't seen. So, let us know. Now, as we sort of start the tour, we're going to do some style hopping. We're going to go from building to building. We need different doesn't matter if you're an architect, you don't need a guide, or if you just want to drink a beer and look at some pretty buildings, we can all come together. Get on the same page. And we're going to start early and iconic here with this beautiful white clock tower. This is the Wrigley Building, 1921. Lovely place to begin. It represents a time in architecture when they were looking to the past, quite often for inspiration, across oceans and centuries. The Wrigley, modeled after La Giralda Tower in the city of Spain, a cathedral there, a Spanish revivalism, taking an older idea, putting a spin on it. On the side of the Wrigley, there were 250,000 terracotta tiles, baked clay in 6 different shades of white. And it kept looking this good 100 years later. They hand-wash the building every year. Also, we can sit on a boat and take a photo of it on our iPhone on a nice summer day, when most of us have meltdown if our dishwashers break. I'm like grateful they're washing this, so I don't have to. Across the river just a few years later, you're going to find columns and a cupola, like a Roman temple, on a London Guillotine accident. Alfred Altschuler, the fine arts style, looking to those ancient Roman and Greek staples, was popular all across the country. Nonetheless, we get 2 different examples of looking to the past in the 1920s. More recently, we get this idea called contextualism, or contextualist design. We have an example in Trump Tower from 2009 by Chicago architect Adrian Smith, the second tallest in the city, and again, the style here is called contextualism. And it's largely the way the buildings talk to each other. Here, it's with the balconies. As you look up, each one of these setbacks is set at the height of the surrounding building that came before it. Helps it fit in, gives it that context. Hence the name. Just a couple of guys being dudes on a boat, nothing weird. The bachelors are back. So yeah, the first was the height of the Wrigley Building, the second the height of Mather Tower across the river, and that top setback is the height of the building just behind it, which is actually the building we're going to talk about next. And it might be the best example of modernism not in Chicago, but in the entire world. This glass and steel black box was the last work by Ludwig Mies van Beek. He was the father of modernism, so I don't know, I just figured why wouldn't we start with the best if we could. Introducing this side. So, 60s and 70s, what is modernism? Modernism is a glass and steel black box. Yeah, that's it, we're done. Don't overthink this one. You might be familiar with the phrase, less is more. That comes from this guy. He changed architecture and how we talk about it forever. Keep in mind, he was coming out of this era of decoration, but a lot of it was poorly done. So he said, God's in the details. The lines of the building match perfectly with the cracks and the flaws of the wall. The closer you look, the more everything is in its place. And he was a professor, too, an influential one. One of his students disagreed with him, I'm pretty sure, because one of his students designed these corncob towers right next door. Bertrand Goldberg's Marina City from the 1960s. Difficult to disagree with any of your professors, but I imagine it would be harder if you disagreed with your mentor, who also happens to be the most famous architect in the world. But for Bertrand Goldberg, he was painting his own way, and he explained over the course of his career, as an artist, he was inspired by nature. Being out in the natural world and never seeing a right angle meant his life's work was never going to be a box. Instead, curved concrete. Born out instead. Also holding a sort of city within a city in the 60s, where you could park your boat, under your car, under your condo, bowling alley, movie theater, fitness center, shops, restaurants, offices, grocery store, ice skating rink, all in the same. He did well. We'll actually see that a little later. A little quickly though, across the river, shorter in the shadows, is 55 West Wacker. Also from the 60s, brutalism. Comes from the French béton brut, which means raw concrete. And the banks, law firms, and insurance companies that used to have their offices in there have sort of since moved on to sleek glass buildings. But while brutalism is ironically hard to maintain and most people think it's ugly, I love 55 West Wacker. It's one of my favorites on the main branch because I think it's a good lesson for all of us that we don't want art to always be beautiful. Right? The world would be a lot less interesting if every piece of art was beautiful. Danny DeVito wouldn't be an actor if all art needed to be beautiful, and the world would be a lot less rich because of it. Great lesson from Louise. Forward and to the right, Red Brick and a clock tower at the Reed Murdoch Center. It's from 1914, beautifully preserved, over 100 years old. And a lot of prairie school influence throughout. Red brick, horizontal lines. Frank Lloyd Wright made this style pretty famous in his homes, but here in George Simmons, I just point out its asymmetry. 6 bays of windows on the right, 5 on the left, which is strange because humans love symmetry. We can't get enough of it. That's why Brad Pitt and Beyonce are Brad Pitt and Beyonce, and the rest of us can anonymously take a boat ride in Chicago. They're more talented than we are, but they also have more symmetric faces. They're better looking. So the building was built with 6 at 6. Of course it was. It wasn't until 1930 rolls around and they widened LaSalle Street for this beautiful bridge. They need more room, so they take it, chopping off part of the building one day, widening the street, and doing some brick work. Hardly anybody would notice 100 years later. Staying right, we'll go to the Chicago School of Architecture. You'll know which building we're talking about because it says the Chicago School on it. It's actually not the School of Professional Psychology, but we'll just take a tour. Concrete, brick, and glass. Maybe back in middle school you learned about how a Corinthian column has 3 parts to it: a base, a shaft, and a capital. And the same is true of a Chicago school building, called a columnar tripartite design, which I've always found useful for those of you who want to impress your friends and family after the tour. Just casually slip tripartite to the conversation. You'll find a way. As we stay right, for Art Deco, the merchandise mark from 1930. First major clue that this is Art Deco is the limestone siding, native to the region. Long vertical lines with dark setback spandrels, repeated geometric shapes. However, to set this up, when you think of Art Deco, I want you to think of Leonardo DiCaprio and The Great Gatsby lifting that coupe full of champagne. The Roaring 20s, everything you think of when you think of that aesthetically is Art Deco. This is a great representation in a warehouse form. Built for Marshall Field as a department store warehouse, that's why those green heads face away from us at street level. Marshall Field, Montgomery Ward, Wanamaker, Sears. I've never heard them called that in my life though. I've always heard them called the Pez dispensers of Chicago. Apparently David Letterman gave that slap about 30 years ago, and everybody just decided, that's better. And we'll see it again later on in the tour. Just so everyone knows, we're passing everything today twice. Passing everything twice, so I'm skipping some stuff that's beautiful on purpose, because you will be mad at me. I had nothing to talk about for the second half of the tour, because I crammed it all into the first. Something so pathetically yourself. In the meantime, welcome to Wolf Point, the confluence of the Chicago River. It's where the main branch, the north branch, and the south branch meet. And, if you can imagine, log cabins in the marshland. 1834, 4,000 residents, they all live very close to here. Now, obviously a lot's changed since then, but a lot's changed recently. No blue glass buildings a decade ago at Wolf Point. None. Parking lots and rail lines. Just a short time ago. And out of all the new buildings, I think most people are sort of drawn to these two in front of us as we get a well-timed L pass, the elevated train. We'll talk more about that wedge-shaped building that's passing a little bit later when we get closer to it. In the meantime, we're actually going to stick with my favorite of the two, just personally, the inverted parabolas on River Point by Pickard and Chilton. I think it goes a little underappreciated, this one. It's an engineering feat in its own right. You got a Riverwalk and plaza, lovely dining space. I mean, just the sculpture, Constellations, was done by Santiago Calatrava, one of the world's most famous architects, just did the sculpture for this thing. I really like it, I do. If that wasn't obvious, I still like it. Even after I had a passenger call it a blue glass hot coffee, which I learned is very difficult to argue with, so stop trying to get it out of my head and just put it indoors. Northbound, a massive bridge in its upright position. In front of us is the 1908 Pearl Street Railroad Bridge. Right off the bat, it's a contradiction. It's a working, dead bridge. It's dead, and it's going, but it's in working condition because it's a landmark. Can't be torn down, must be maintained as in the Greek said. It's broken down once every year. Pretty end ceremonies, I've never seen it, usually 4 a.m. on a random Tuesday. To bring it down, drive a specially made pickup truck across the rails, maybe do some maintenance. Maybe not. Go back. Why keep it around? It's slightly subjective, but there's a visual piece of engineering history here that I think is useful, especially if you want to understand how our other bridges work. You can see the exposed mechanics of the Basco Bridge, the concrete counterweight and suspension of the bridge. The motor that powers this thing would rival an industrial lawnmower today. A beast of its time. But every day I see it hold up as a piece of public art, commanding attention from everything. Pretty steep competition when you consider that Harry Meese's iconic river cottages are right across the river. Might not surprise to learn that this guy was a sailor, 4th-year architect. So triangles like sails, circular portable windows, and most of his designs. There are 4 cottages here. Pretty rarely see the market. The one in the center right, though, sold in 2015 for $2.3 million, followed by a 5-year renovation. We can talk more real estate too if you'd like. In the meantime, we're going to get turned around on the North Branch so we can head south. I'm actually going to hop off the mic while we do, give you a slight but well-written brief. Also an opportunity to visit or revisit our judgment, Jamie, the bartender. Stay hydrated, however you see fit. Great person, even better bartender. Treat him well, tip him well. And I'll, of course, be around for any burning questions and concerns. In the meantime, all you can do is let me know. We'll be back in just a minute.
Holiday pad, fantastic place, and I think it's holiday pad. Every layer. So I'll do late kind of. Yeah, I'll again meet.
Excuse me, sir. Sorry, if you want to be on the phone, you gotta head downstairs. Thank you.
Fine. Yes, but.
Private phone. So, if we have our own kayak, it is just for not just for that. You can enter generally boats and then the world. They'll have a license. World liquid. But there are lake. Probably tourists.
చూసాం కదా బోట్స్ లెఫ్ట్ సైడ్ లో దే వర్ పార్క్ రైట్ దెన్ వి క్యాన్ నో అక్కడ అపార్ట్మెంట్ లో ఉండేవాళ్ళు దెన్ వి క్యాన్ ఎస్
You're welcome to the phone. We just asked you to keep it short clips.
Sure.
Yeah, thank you so much.
అప్పు కదా ఈ సైడ్కి
Give it here. Name भी अपना giant ले लेते हैं.
high road. High road.
आधे कलर नहीं there is I haven't gone. I mean, outlink at this point.
अभी basic पे complex.
But every time you have to go to the beach, you have to cross.
So,
Even
we're
museums
going
are
next
not.
on the important to do because it's the oldest thing I can show you today along the river. This pink brick building coming up here to our right is called Fulton House, and it was built in the year 1898. Originally designed by a guy named Frank Adams for the meat packing industry of Union stock bars. They asked for a giant freezer, so they had this built. 4-foot thick walls, we call that cold air filter. Many of the there was about since carved in place. Originally the walls here are stuffed with a mixture of horsehair and cork as insulation. As they were 12, and in the 80s they remodeled into condos. Of residential real estate. And whenever I say condos, people want to know how much. Which is a good question. I have the same curiosity. It's just not a good question to ask me, an architecture guy. You're thinking of a real estate professional. I might talk about a lawsuit during this tour related to architecture, but none of you are going to ask me for any casual legal advice, now are you? That's a perfect metaphor. So, with that being said that you shouldn't listen to me, I'll give you the range. You want to know downtown along the river. The very bottom of the barrel, and there's a reason we're going to the bottom of the barrel. $250,000? But of course, we want not bottom of the barrel. Price goes up, right? Bigger place, better view. Townhome, $2 million, adding a zero, upwards of $10 million, $20 million for the most recent Riverside campus. So if you want to buy one of the places we're passing today, it'll cost you somewhere between $200,000 and $20 million. If you're serious about this, hire a professional. If you're feeling bad about yourself, as I do every time I have to talk about this, I can help with that. I've even timed it up with this view back down the main branch to help cheer me up. Certainly a lesser known favorite of mine, back down again of the main branch. And while you're enjoying that view, we'll go back to the right, past River Point, and on over to that understandably eye-catching, martini-glass shaped foundation of 150 North Riverside. Only utilizing 20% of its lot area for the foundation. Most of this building, we're talking 70% of it, is built above right? And because of gravity, all the compounded mass has to go somewhere. Here, it's redistributed via that wedge. It's called a double cantilever into the core of the building, which then has 120-foot piers of concrete and steel dug down into bedrock. It's actually a relatively simple sort of engineering idea. Delicate balance. I like it. It's impressive, but it's not my favorite part of the design. I don't remember telling you something that's my favorite. It's just that. It's my opinion. But if you want to see my favorite part of the design, as you come underneath the bridge, take your eyes up into our reflection. That's us, right there. Yeah, you can wave yourself. That's kind of the point. How do you look? Not even joking, a little bit. Easily measurable card. Now they did find an issue with wind. All tall buildings had to deal with wind sway, but here they found it was going to be too much. So they installed 160,000 gallons worth of water tanks inside the top of the building that fill and unfill with water as the winds pick up and die down. So a tuned inertial slosh damper. But think about it this way. If on an otherwise blustery day you might get seasick at your desk in there, the tanks will fill partially, not fully with water. So if the winds push the building in one direction, the tanks will go with it as they're fixed. What's the water fixed to? Nothing. So it instead sloshes inside of the tanks themselves, encouraging the building to its upright position, thereby reducing vibration. Works well too for them because those same architects designed this. Right after that, Getch Partners behind 110 North Wacker from 2021. More recent along the river. And another example and a recent trend of eye-catching riverwalk engineering being the focal point. We're not being drawn to the tops of these buildings, but instead with a parabola, a wedge, these three-pronged trusses, which makes sense. When I talk to you people who work in office buildings, maybe you'll look up on your first day of work if you're nervous, take it all in. I've learned day 2, nobody looks up. right? You listen to a podcast, drink your coffee, read the newspaper, you go to work, you go home. The people for whom this building was built don't look up at it. So why wouldn't you have this streetscape where they interact daily, be beautiful, practical, and useful? I don't know. We'll see if that trend continues going forward. In the meantime, we'll go back to 1929. That's when both of these buildings were built. Art Deco, remember limestone siding and vertical lines like at the Merchandise Mall. To the right, a beautiful Riverside Plaza. Okay? To the left, no. Not a Riverside Plaza. Same year. One of them had to be strange and surprising. And it was the Riverside Plaza that was strange in 1929 because back then, and for most of our history, the river was our sewer system. For everything. I'm not getting into the details, I promise you it's worse than whatever you're thinking of. I used to prove it to people, but it really kills the mood on the boat. It's nice. You want to be known as the friendly boat ride on the river. With some seemingly unattended children on a bridge. It's nice. Seem to be having fun. It's very good too. The river, it was our sewer. And obviously today that's changed. But also it's being built on land that's changed, right? Today you must account for Riverwalk or Plaza in a design. But we'll talk about why that's not really a complaint today. But the water sort of precipitates why that changed. In the meantime, we're going to stay to the right for the next three buildings. The 60s, the 70s, and the 80s. It's like somebody went into a history book, ripped out a timeline, and had it built in real life. So we can see how architecture evolves, all defined by SOM in the 60s, 70s, and 80s. And we're starting off with this building, which I think none of you will remember from the tour. Which is strange, because the first time somebody saw a black box in the 60s, it's all they thought about for weeks. Jaws running sidewalks. Because guess what civilizations in written history had built something resembling this? None. Never before had humanity built anything that would resemble this. It was shocking. At least one girl, he was a pretty smart guy, pretty sure. He started playing over Fortune 500 CEOs with his details. And then wouldn't you know, once C-level executives started working in black boxes, major companies, they became functional. Like anything, once rich people wanted to do something, people followed suit. This is human, right? Very sort of humanistic thing. We move into the 1970s. It's still catching on. The next style of architecture after modernism is a white box. It's still modernism. White or gray stone is a change, but don't call it modernism. Because something else was changing. It was no longer being built in 5 cities like it was in the 60s. Where were boxes being built in the 70s? Everywhere on the planet. That's why it doesn't matter where you come from or what language you speak. You're bored by a box because Chicago and Mies van der Rohe made it the first global trend in the history of the world. Which is why we call a white box international style, to represent that first global trend. Arguably, things get more interesting in the 80s with curving green glass. Contextualism this time tipping its cap not to the height of another building, but the upcoming curve and color of the river. And of the river provides inspiration. Which sort of leads to this mural. I love this part of the tour. I get a lot of questions about this. The story goes essentially that a decade ago, the owner of this building took about a dozen tours on the river, and not a single tour mentioned this building. The owner, frustrated, hires an artist during a rehab to do a mural on the riverside, and tasks that artist with designing a mural that will put this building finally back on the map again. Back. If this made-up story that never happened didn't buy you enough time, it's just a giant "You Are Here" map painted in the building. The red rectangle is the building. You are here. That's it. It's honestly been the best reviewed piece of public art in maybe 50 years. Less is more concept on a modernist box. I have no notes. I kind of wish I looked at this. That's not a crowd pleaser for you. This might be a 2.5 million square foot building that you might recognize as Gotham City Bank from The Dark Knight with Heath Ledger and Joker. Massive. In reality, what you're looking at is the world's largest ever post office. You wanted to get your Christmas present to your family member across the country for most of the 20th century, it came right through here via railway. Hand-sorted train lines that run underneath it, but of course mail changes. We moved into a trucking facility in the 1990s, and then this building, one of our largest, sits vacant and falling apart for 2 decades. Not 2 years, 20 years. Broken windows, fallen bricks. Most Chicagoans have recent memories of driving through it at night. I remember when I was a kid, I called it Chicago's haunted house because I was scared of it for my entire life. It's amazing what $900 million can do. Renovated into a new luxury office building. 3.5-acre rooftop park. They actually went above and beyond some of the landmark requirements, seeing some of the history they required to old rail chutes and breakthroughs. It's really a beautiful restoration. But we're not really inclined for that. $900 million to renovate 2.5 million square feet in a brand new office space that opened in 2020. Don't feel bad for them. They spent the last 3 years complaining that they have 6% they can't lease. All the companies that want that 6%, they're too big. If you would have found the most optimistic preservationalist a decade ago, when it was a giant haunted house, and asked them, what are the chances that it's even saved? 50-50. An outlier of an outlier of an outlier. And, beautiful piece of art deco history preserved. A lot can change in a few years, which seems to be the refrain for me down here. To the left, a lot has changed in 5 years. Because if you took this tour 5 years ago, you couldn't see any architecture to the left. This was a vacant lot with a line of trees just a few years ago. The South Loop, here to our left, has become the 8th fastest growing residential neighborhood, not in the city, but in the country. So we've seen lots of major developments. Right here along the river, that vacant lot now has 3 of what will soon be 6 residential towers, as well as this brand new Riverwalk. And the Riverwalk for me that replaced that old decaying seawall is the sticking point. Because this has never happened before. I don't mean a Riverwalk, I mean a private company on the south branch of the river putting a dime into the river itself. And this wasn't a dime, they spent $3 million on a free Riverwalk before a single cent of revenue started coming into the project. What might that tell us? I think it tells us that even residential developers, right, those who've been most on the sidelines for decades, the most skeptical of the river, they're not just predicting the future of the river is going to be beautiful like the rest of us, they're betting millions of dollars on it for the first time ever. To me, that seems like a bit of a sea change. And, looks like financing is working out well enough to continue financing on the project, and all of it is joining what I'm guessing you might find noticeably older. Curved concrete Jetsons residences down here on the South Branch from our friend Bertrand Goldberg, like we saw at his corn pipes of Marina City. This comes about 20 years later, 1986. This time it's River City. But as you might expect, the same thesis, a curved concrete city within a city. And not everybody likes the whole curved concrete aesthetic. I think you're sort of either buy into that retro futurism or you say, I don't want to live in a concrete building. But regardless, it is certainly iconic. And that city within a city is probably more influential because every new building going up around it is a city within a city. You just don't hear it called that, but every new building has a rooftop garden, pool, fitness center, chef's kitchens, movie rooms, coffee shops, restaurants, concierge services, co-working spaces, golf simulator rooms, and the luxury market. Every new building is some version of a city within a city. It's just the thing that I read more often than not is amenity-rich urban living. Don't you get the idea? And I don't think he was doing this intentionally, but he kind of accidentally predicted the future of city planning. One of the things that's come out of city planning over the last decade or so is what's known as a livable city. But it's a big deal because over time we're sort of finding, with the benefit of the internet, that people are living longer, happier, and healthier lives in livable cities. And there's a couple different metrics you can use, and you have to adjust for some pretty obvious things like wealth of nations, access to healthcare. But when you do this, we're finding the most livable cities in the world are also the most walkable cities in the world. That's where people live in their best lives, where you can go pick up your kid from school, grab a bottle of wine, something from the dry cleaners, the dog from the groomer, and be back within a reasonable time by foot, bike, or transit. That's where people are living longer, happier, and healthier lives. And I don't think Bertie Goldberg was saying that necessarily, but we're going to return to this thought a couple of times, that buildings and cities are both built for people. There's something kind of uniquely human there. And that is a very uniquely Chicago thing over there that I'm really vibing with. As people Riverwalks become normal, it's still a good reminder that you're going to find interesting people everywhere you look in the city. Yeah, livable cities, walkable cities, it's important to note that. And Bertie Goldberg, he wasn't designing for a city in 2023, but he was designing a luxury residence in an industrial city that's regularly 90 degrees colder than it is today. What's luxury in a smog-filled city that's negative 30 degrees Fahrenheit in January? You don't want to leave the building. You don't have to. You have the luxury of living next to it. Just kind of knocking on the door with a bigger idea. As we get a beautiful skyline view looking north from our south branch. As always, feel free to grab a photo or just enjoy the view. Just make sure you're taking turns with the people around you. The person behind you can grab that same photo, enjoy that same view. And we're going to talk more about this skyline in front of us for important reasons. I think you could even argue obvious reasons. But before we do that, we're going to talk about why where we are right now, in more ways than one, gave us the skyline we have today. And I'm guessing some of you have some context for this already. We had a bit of a fire back in the day. See, so ahead, that's very true. The Great Chicago Fire of 1871. It started over there, 3 blocks to our west. Just past this old power plant that used to power the train station. And I'm guessing, in my experience, if you know about the fire, you probably know about the story of how it started. If you know the story of how the fire started, would you just shout out a buzzword for me? Cow. Cow tends to be the buzzword. Perfect. You play your roles perfectly. The story goes like this. Sunday, October 8th of 1871. Mrs. Catherine O'Leary leaves a kerosene lantern over in her barn on Dakota Street, and that's when her cat, famously her cow, Daisy, kicks that kerosene lantern into the hay, starting it, the barn, and eventually the city ablaze. A wild and famous story, right? It's told all over the world 150 years later. Never had a boat ride where nobody knew the story. It's not true, which is relevant, even though there are songs written about it. Still sung today in certain parts of the city. It is again not true, and that is again relevant. It is a good story. That's not up for debate. If you don't like the story, you're welcome to be wrong. It's still a good story. It is in fact so good, I will lose my job in 2023 if I don't on every tour talk about a fake story that was recanted 2 weeks after the fire. It's a good story. And honestly, sometimes the truth is disappointing. If you want to live your life dedicated to the truth, I can respect that in theory, but I am not interested because the truth is often disappointing. And the truth is, we don't know how the fire started. I'm sorry that you're not going to leave this conversation satisfied. Just delighted. I can't tell you how the fire started. I can't tell you where the fire started. Just about 3 blocks to our west, over on Beethoven Street, on October 8th, 1871, the flames rose, right when they were pushed to the river. There was, of course, fueled by a top layer of oil-based industrial waste in the river, into the city center. It burned for 3 days. It killed 318,000 jumpers to the ground, 100,000 Chicagoans. 1 in 3 Chicagoans. And so it seems a terrible moment in history, rightfully so. It's also today unironically seen as the best thing that has ever happened. Counterintuitive, of course, but the first Chicago didn't stand a chance. The first Chicago I call an industrial Wild West because in many ways, before the fire, you could come to Chicago and build whatever you wanted, wherever you want it, however you want it, so long as it built the city and made it. You look at fast-growing civilizations in written history before the fire. Things we were not great at. Living long, happy, and healthy lives. Right? It was a mess despite our growth. It was dangerous, right? Zoning laws weren't a thing, building codes, certainly not. We were building our streets out of wood because it was faster and cheaper, along with the buildings. Why would I waste my money in paying taxes to fund a functioning fire department? When would we ever need one of those? I think you can put yourself in the shoes of those Chicagoans looking at the rubble and ash saying, let's not do this to ourselves. And maybe we even overcorrected, and in the process became the birthplace of modern city planning. There was this really important guy, Daniel Furman, who was an architect in the years following the fire. He eventually was hired to design fairgrounds for a World's Fair held in 1893. 22 years after Chicago burned to the ground, a city of less than 1 million welcomed over 27 million visitors from across the globe for what still seen today as the best World's Fair ever. We bounced back on our world stage and then rehired Daniel Brown, not for fairgrounds, but to do a plan for the entire city. And in 1909, Daniel Brown publishes his Plan of Chicago, and city planning becomes a profession. And nobody on this boat has let the city left today because of it. That 1909 plan, it's not perfect. I'm not going to defend it. It was fine for its time, just like Daniel Burton. But think about things we all still use today. Things, we take for granted naturally as humans, like the lakefront, the Riverwalk. Even here, our streets, the grid system, diagonal streets and boulevards, Upper and Lower Wacker Drive, our extensive alleyway network that we tuck away our garbage before pickup, so you're surprised how clean our streets are. 90% of Chicagoans, when they walk out their front door, they're less than 10 minutes to walk to a public park. We just talked about earlier, walking the cities. These things don't happen organically over time. They must be planned. And one of the things I haven't even mentioned yet, we built a skyline full of buildings actually worth talking about on an architecture tour. The idea that we all be on this boat today that might probably exist without the fire is at best unlikely and towards the It's certainly not saying the fire wasn't good, it was tragic. It's just that it also gave us quite literally everything that we recognize in our life for today. A silver lining and a silver lining. To the right, I'm sure I've lost one of you already, understandably, to a 3-story tall aluminum statue on top of the Chicago Board of Trade. From 1930, CERES, Ceres, the Roman goddess of the harvest. She sits atop the Board of Trade because we're in the Midwest. Agricultural commodities, and inevitably someone will say, that is not the Board of Trade, that is the Enterprises. But the true and honestly, ever since that movie, every live action Batman was ever wearing, it was mainly film. They always stopped in Chicago to use that film. Something unbelievable. In front of us, we'll go to these 2 tall buildings, but I've always sort of called our king and queen chess pieces, if you will. First up was 311 South Wacker, pretty interesting. I've always admired this design, because to design the world's tallest building like its neighbor, that's an intensely sort of big platform. But to design the building that's going to have to go next to the world's tallest building is also kind of a big ask. And I've always loved the bright and sort of fancy design. It takes up space. It's got this bright, big grand perimeter and illuminated at night. At the same time, it walks around while being its own person. So, the special neighbor to a simple family, the Maydays, the red attic, the Sears town, maybe the Willis Tower, is a little house with a line like 1,451 feet tall means 110 stories, 100 elevators inside, over 16,000 windows. The tallest building in the world for 24 years. So the tallest in Chicago today. Architect Bruce Graham and structural engineer Paz O'Connor premiering their Bundle 2 system and changing the stuff.
Yeah, it does.
Always love this view, but you'll notice it does have to take a short break behind the giant UR pyramid. So if you missed that on the first pass, you can see it again. And in the meantime, we'll go left to arguably one of my most favorite parts of the tour. That is the glass of Gateway Center 4. As we come near the bridge, if you would, find a reflection in this building and follow for a moment. Now find a single pane of glass, and you'll see they're all curved. Convex bubble glass, pinched in the corner of each pane. It's a beautiful thing from over at. And remember, this building honors the river. With the curve in the facade, the color of the glass honors the river. And even as we casually catch a reflection as we float on by, it looks less like a reflection in a building and a whole lot more like a reflection in the river itself. And every day, thousands find a reason they missed him, hiding in plain sight. Something lovely in that subtlety. And noticeably less subtle is the true magnitude of the Sears to our right. You can even see through the bridge if you want, all the way up to the 103rd floor, where you'll find some glass boxes hanging off the side of the building called the ledge. That's Skydeck. Essentially, there are people in those glass boxes, and they're taking pictures of us. So, what you want that information. Yeah, you can take a photo. This is our last view of the tallest building in Chicago. So if you want to stay with me, take your eyes all the way to the spine to those antennae on the top. And now that we're looking at the antenna, feel how tall this building is in your neck right now. I feel like in some ways that's the best I can do to help you understand how tall it is. That visceral feeling, right? And just as a gentle reminder, I didn't grab you by the hand and walk you up to the building, put your toes against it and say, look up, honey, isn't that a tall building? You're a block and a half away, in the river, reclined. And not all of you look dry as you do, because for you, nah, it's going to hurt my body too much to look at a building that's a little bit away. That's how tall it is. And I think sometimes things like that around the corners of understanding, things that facts in the world just don't do. Like those antennae on top, it's kind of a complex ruling from the world 15 years ago. But essentially, antennae don't count in the height of the building. They're added later. And so those antennae on top, they don't even count towards the height of the building. However, the height of just one antenna on top of the Sears Tower is the same height as one of these black boxes to the left. 1 to 1. Nothing comes close. The tallest building in the world for 24 years. It's called the Willis Tower today. Legally, Willis Insurance, they have office space and they pay extra for the name. It's advertising. Like your local stadium, lots of things with naming rights nowadays. It could have another 100 names over the course of its life, I think. For that reason and a couple others, Chicagoans still call it the Sears Tower. More often now. Because that's what it was called for over 30 years. The entire time it was the tallest building in the world. For 24 years, it was the Sears. So when you talk to somebody, especially if they grew up in Chicago in the 70s and 80s, they remember it as Sears. There's just a vibe to it. So while you're here, I'd recommend calling our tallest building the Sears Tower. If you just cover your bases, you'll get better directions, you'll make friends more easily, you'll have a better time. I have done my due diligence as you're back. Up and to the right is the Mercantile Exchange Center, built for finance in the 80s. At the top, you'll see it has serrated corners. Built for finance in the 80s, it's called a Frederick, because everybody in the 80s in finance wanted a corner office in the beautiful view. So much so that this building recognizes that and says, you want corner offices, right? You're 16 on every floor. And every other building in the block only has 4 floors. So, theoretically, by leasing out the space here, you get to keep 4 times the best. 4 times the most insecure employees at your company. By giving them the corner office they've always dreamed of, you get to pay them less because you gave them the corner office. And where does that surplus go? To rent, to pay the developer who hired the architect in the first place. Mies van Brugge summed this up well by saying, form follows function. To the left, truly clock towers, people who did this building, were designed as an intentional homage to the Sphinx of Egypt with its columns. King Tutankhamun's tomb is being unearthed in Egypt at this time, massive cultural impacts. Really not just on architecture, but interior design and fashion. Massive cultural impacts, but across the river, same year, same style, at the Civic Opera Building, and we discovered Greek masks of comedy and tragedy adorning the side of the building. A fine arts decoration, as we talked about earlier, on the side of the Art Deco facade. Why? Because it's an opera house, so there's a theater in there, so the architect said we're going to put the theater masks on that theater building. I'm not convinced anybody was even bothering them back then. It's easy for us to look back with our fine-tooth comb and find these compositions, but it's harder than that. Look at these brand new buildings. I get great questions like, what style of architecture is this? And the answer is, I don't know. Nobody does. I mean, people will gladly give you the name, right? Contemporary, very creative. I've heard it called high-res design or smartphone architecture. But if you want to know the name of the guy who encouraged the devices to come back 15 years from now, or when somebody's standing on this boat, with the benefit of hindsight, he will tell you exactly what the style is and how it fit in the cultural moment of 2024. Looking at your crystal ball, I'm happy to say. I think it's kind of fun having this conversation. We don't know a person or what idea is going to come along tomorrow. Take everything that's important to do. Let's talk bridges. It's important we do. All the bridges we're considering today are called double Neutron and fast but I had a bridge maker tell me they fall in Chicago bridges, so I think we can too. Or this type of movable bridge than any other city on the planet. Probably won't surprise you to learn. All the ones we're considering are so operable today, and all of them are different architecture, so you can find your favorite before you leave town. Over 100 years in the bridges themselves, old bridge houses. The Lake Street Bridge is one of my favorites. It's beautiful at a dual level, but the main reason I like it is this was built in 1916, and it could then and can still today be opened and closed all in about 4 minutes, all using the power of a motor you might find in a Honda Civic from the late 1980s. They're beautiful, massive, and unique engineering feats of their time. Back out onto the road, time giving us one last view of that massive merchandise mark, and it's 4.2 million square feet. This thing had its own zip code for that. It still has its own house now, which will work there. It's well maintained as an office building, which this new tower will soon be. Largely for Salesforce, a large long term in the city. But not too local of the conversation is this curved box, the 333 West Block. It's from 1983, and it's aged gracefully. The marble looks like new. It's not an old building per se. I would never say if you're from the 80s or old. And this building is old over a point. Because again, nothing in its reflection for 30, 32, 35 years, in the last decade, a quarter of its age. It's reflecting the city as it goes around it. And there's something beautiful and almost poetic about that. A lesson we can learn from this building. It doesn't matter how long you exist in the world, one way. You can always have to change the world within yourself and change right along. Nobody cares about that. They want to know where Ferris Bueller's dad worked in the film. Ferris Bueller's dad. In front of it's the Riverwalk, which has been a more recent big deal. It opened in 2017. Then next to the lakefront, you have the front field and stroll. Something for everybody here between. You have to try not to like the Riverwalk, right? The Grinch would like the Riverwalk, right? You have to try not to. How do you enjoy a Riverwalk? Walk along the river. It's nice. Humans like water. Now that being said, there's much to do as well. Giant projectors installed that turn the side of this building into a 2-acre canvas every night at 8:30, featuring local art, the largest production-based art installation in the world. You see people fishing next to gardens that encourage wildlife to return to the river. You can rent a boat, a kayak, bars, and restaurants. There's a museum open today at Michigan Avenue Bridge to go into the bridge to learn about it. all run by Friends of the Chicago River who have helped advocate for the river since the 80s, and yet still. But all that's great. As the sun sets tonight at the end of the river canyon, and all these buildings laid out in ways that even most of the people who designed them never would have imagined wildest dreams. It's just great history. Enjoy some bubble guard, maybe a cocktail. Have a good time. It's a pretty easy one. The closest thing to us to do. So long as it's not all freezing, isn't it? There was the city ordinance that said to build taller than 264 feet, you had to step back to 1/4 of the original foundation area. Better allow sunlight than the buildings and city streets. Just city ordinances. Right. It's on this point until still. And blue glass office building does not sound like peanut butter and chocolate to me, but a carnival feel finds a way to pull it off. It keeps its decoration simple, it's not condescending, it's messy. Black sweep skywards, tall and elegant, pitch the light just right in the heart of a day, so you can see this building as clouds of simultaneously inside. I actually don't know, because at the end of the day, after that I do, then we'll hop on over 55 West Rackford to the Leo Burnett and its columnar Chicago school design. Just found this giant column, and what I want to draw your attention is about a third of the way up. You see that two-story tall walls at the same height as 55 West Rackford? Those are their mechanical floors, the HVAC and stuff. Is that a coincidence it's the same height as 55 West Rackford? Of course not. Contextualism, a newer building tipping its hat to a railroad shouldering. And if you're like me and you like to eat on the river, yes, it's the first quality architecture, but that's a massive part of the quality. Dozens and dozens of details like that are just right now, I can see that simultaneously forward and to the right, the Golden Top of the Carlisle private building is here to again burn the sun, and most people, including myself, just call it the Shell Energy Ball building. Worth noting, however, that's not gold at the time. It is instead 24 karat gold. We are there. Then come back and go up a few weeks for ornamented domes on the jewelers building. Beautifully restored ornament from 1926. It opened with a car elevator. There's a speakeasy in the top front just after Prohibition ended, called the Stratosphere Lounge. And that's not why we went to Junior's building, but maybe it's because Decepticons. Sorry, Transformers. Robots in disguise of war. That's a CGI conversation. 4 buildings, 3 hotels, all pushed together, up on one another to the right. Mather Tower lies in your hill. Very briefly, mentioned it earlier on the tour, we remember we matched up with that second contextual section that jumped across the way. I think that's the Mather Tower, it's long short name of the tour though. It's originally landmark in the photo, putting English in his face as the Sears